Wake to quiet up. Kris Archie runs Squest. Sequapim de Gamlo from Tiaskin. My name is Kris, and I'm really delighted to be here as I fiddle with my notes. There we go. Okay, so in February of 2021, I was turning 39, and I decided that it would be a good time to get these sleeves tattooed on my arms. I also bought a fairly mint, cherry red 1983 Suzuki Savage motorbike, which I've still never ridden. And I also got a Frenchton puppy whose name is Pepper. In addition to what would be considered as a very typical midlife moment, we were also still in the clutches of COVID. This was the Omicron era. I was also coming out of my first year of language learning. One of the best gifts that COVID created for me in my life and in my community was that our Sequapim learning language classes, they went online for community members for the first time ever. It was really one of the most special things about this moment in time. The beautiful thing about language learning was that it was very quickly reminding me, compelling me, in fact, that I needed to be back home in Tiaskin more often and for longer periods of time. It was an undeniable shift. I was deeply activated by learning my language, by stumbling over the words, by feeling what it is to be a new learner of something that was deep, deep inside of me. But it also meant that I committed to moving home. You might be asking yourselves, what does any of this midlife crisis, language learning journey, dusty motorcycle, and a desire for moving home have to do with philanthropy? Well, for one, it helped me activate my seasonal sabbatical. This is a 1 week per season leave that I take as the CEO for a national organization called the Circle on Philanthropy. An investment in my leadership as an Indigenous person, leading an Indigenous organization, bringing Indigenous worldviews and wisdom to the philanthropic sector. This leave meant that I was allowed to return home to my territory for a week a season, and as I began to activate this leave, I started to notice again the fullness of 4 seasons. It wasn't just gray, rainy season and less gray and maybe sunny, as we have here in the wet West Coast. So when I started to be home more often through these periods of my seasonal sabbatical, it's when I started to notice this plant called Sifnelf. If you have a program and if you search around, you might also notice it there. As I was driving in the spring, this almost impossible shade of green would start to sprout up on the roadsides, and it would like catch a flash. It was almost animated because it was so bright. I wondered if I was like maybe hallucinating a little bit or just seeing a brand new bird for the first time. It would show up in ditches, and in particular, especially after the wildfires in the 2017 season in my territory of Sequapim. It was also showing up in these places that had been like deeply blackened and charred because wildfire had gone through the landscape. In the summer, this vivid fuchsia would burst forth, and then it would make way for this plant that would like turn fuzzy and would float around. And at the very end of its life cycle, what would be left behind would be a tall and stunning orange-gold display of leaves. This plant kept calling my name and catching my eye, inviting me to deepen a relationship to place. And as I spent more and more time at home and with this plant, I came to discover some very key pieces of wisdom about its glorious present. This plant thrives in disturbed soil. In land that has been ravaged by fire, soil disturbance, and erosion, it takes root, and it propagates, and it springs up over and over again. What's really amazing is that it has value in terms of being food and medicine, and it brings beauty very consistently at every stage of its life cycle, from being a new shoot to being a flower to becoming fluff and leaves. And in Sequapim territory, you may also find it in medicine pouches, in bras, and in pockets, because some people will also say that it brings you luck in gambling and in love, which is really the same thing. So this coming into relationship with Sifnelf also correlates with our Aunties in Philanthropy gathering, which is really a gathering of Indigenous women from around the globe who are coming together to recognize our leadership in new ways of giving and being in relationship and of extending our generosity to those around us. That was a partnership with the International Funders for the Indigenous Peoples, the Arctic Funders Collaborative, and the Circle on Philanthropy. Where we spent our very first gathering was actually in Talel, which is on Haida Gwaii, and Talel is their place name for the same plant. So what started to happen is I noticed that whenever there was times of gathering of Indigenous folks, there was beauty and medicine and abundance of healing started to be uncovered. And over time, I would start to see these as flashes of green and pink. What I noticed is that when we were getting together and sharing with each other our cultural ways of giving, we were activating our truest abundance. We were also mending places of disturbed soil, the places and the spaces where the violence of patriarchy, settler colonialism, and white supremacy had caused violence and harm. In these places, Indigenous gifting, abundance, reciprocity, and relationship building, the same kind of Sifnelf was spreading, it was growing, and it continues to bring flashes of restoration, healing, and connection. Since 2020, our organization has been bringing together what we call our cousins, Indigenous folks, and also inviting Black and racialized folks to be in relationship for strategizing solidarity and connection so that we might learn together and expand how it is that we can be in good work outside of the white gaze, while also still recognizing the abundance that we are offering to this sector that deeply needs it. There's some story about how philanthropy begins when first settlers came to this country and Indigenous peoples kind of gave of their generosity to help people live. But in fact, Indigenous philanthropy has been here since the beginning of time and continues to be here. The invitation that we make for folks from our organization and to those of you here or at home is to start to recognize the flashes of green and pink. If you see fireweed where you are, you might not understand its life cycle. You might not understand the makeup of its genetic being. You may not realize that it is actually deeply mending the disturbed soil from where it grows. However, if you take it upon yourself to recognize that in living systems, in places where Indigenous abundance is given opportunities to thrive, to give, and to be present, when its leadership is supported, we will continue to support an evolution of coming together that doesn't benefit just us. In fact, it supports and benefits all of us in this fabric of the country known as Canada. It's with deep thanks and appreciation I give to those of you who are here, but also to philanthropic organizations who also recognize that there's a real opportunity alive right now, which is that we can put aside our comprehensiveness, we can put aside our desire for knowing all the things, and instead start to invest in the leadership of Indigenous organizations, Indigenous innovations, and the leadership of people who are in deep, deep connection to place, who are in relationship to the people and to the wisdoms of lands and waters and animals. And in only those ways, in only those moments, can we begin to feel proud and filled with restoration for a future we can all be much prouder of. Kukshim.